Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Amaazen Outdoors. This podcast is being presented by Uplnd Outfitters, home of the relentless pants, man. Those things are awesome. I had them out this week, and I pretty much, since I started the partnership with Jason, have been wearing those pants out anytime over the summer here where I had to do any work at the farm or dog training. I've even had them on the boat a little bit. They are tough as nails. I have yet to see a pull 'em thread. I've been in some nasty briars. They really held up a lot better than I thought. I can't recommend them enough. Hunting season is around the corner. Make sure you use discount code Amaazen, and I believe Jason is still offering 20% off on the relentless pants. So pick up a pair before hunting season is upon us, and you're out in the woods with a pair of ripped up pair of pants and sweating, unnecessarily, because Jason's pants and the relentless pants are top notch and breathable, light. So you're going to want them this early season. Make sure you get them now. I also have a quick announcement. We've got another kind of temporary partnership with Chippewa River Custom Rods. Tom is going to be offering 10% off with discount code Amaazen 10. Amaazen 10, and it's all caps. If you decide to call him for a custom rod, just make sure you tell him that you heard about custom rods on Amaazen Outdoors podcast, and he will make sure that you get hooked up with a discount. All that information for both sponsors and partners are going to be in the show notes, so please support the podcast and these great companies. They are really good partners for the podcast, and I would like to see our listeners support them as well. So look them up, Uplnd Outfitters and Chippewa River Custom Rods. Enjoy today's show. Oh yeah, we're back for another episode of the Amaazen Outdoors podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We got a special guest. We always got a special guest, but today it's Bob Hanson from the Wisconsin DNR. We talk sharptails. He is the biologist for the Northwest Sands and Wisconsin Sharptails. It's a great episode. Tune in for the nitty-gritties about these birds in Northwest Wisconsin. This podcast is being brought to you by Uplnd Outfitters, home of the relentless pants. Be relentless. They're awesome pants. That's all I'm going to say. If you don't like them, send them back. But make sure when you do go check out Uplnd Outfitters that you tell them that I sent you by using discount code Amaazen. It gets you 10% off, free shipping. And if you don't like them, send them back. Tell them I told them so. Told you so. So they're great pants. I can't say enough about the American-made product and the people behind it. Promo code Amaazen, 10% off, free shipping. And make sure that you know we stole all the A's. So Uplnd Outfitters is UPLND. UPLND Outfitters. UplandOutfitters.com. Check them out. Well, I have Bob Hanson with the Wisconsin DNR. Bob, welcome to the Amaazen Outdoors podcast. Can you introduce yourself and let everybody, the listeners, know here what you do for a living and why you love Sharptail Grouse so much?
Yeah, great to be here. So once again, my name is Bob Hanson. I'm the Northwest Sands wildlife biologist for Wisconsin DNR, but I'm also the Sharptail Grouse biologist for Wisconsin DNR, and it kind of ties together those two, the habitat and the bird. And the Northwest Sands is where we have the pine barrens, and that's kind of our current and historic habitat. Sharptail grouse would be in the more open pine barrens, and so that ties in the habitat with the life history of the bird, as far as where it currently exists in the state, and where it historically would have existed, across the state, mostly in the south, in the west, and then the northwest here.
Awesome. Now, Bob, I personally, I got introduced to bird hunting later in life, got a couple pointing dogs, and shot my first sharptail out in North Dakota. And that was kind of an enlightening moment for me. And then a couple of years ago, I shot my first prairie chicken, which was even more of an enlightening experience. And I started to dig and found the stories of some of these birds in Wisconsin. And I found it kind of a unique, just a unique story in comparison to some of the bigger prairie states. So can you maybe give us a little history on where, there was a big cutover in Wisconsin that happened, and I don't know how that affected the sharp-tailed grouse from where maybe their native range was in Wisconsin. So could you give us a little history on the bird and, where was it prior to the cut, and then kind of progress us through today where the birds are currently located?
Yeah. So like I was kind of mentioned a little bit ahead of time there, they were in the southern part of the state, west, and then in this northwest. So the southern part of the state would have been more in kind of that savanna type system, a little bit more grassland oriented. Um, and up here, the pine barrens in the northwest, that's the pine barrens is a kind of a mix of kind of prairie type species, but also heath type shrubs like blueberries and stuff like that. And then also then these fire adapted tree species, like jack pine in particular, is the main tree of the pine barrens, but also red pine to a certain extent, aspen, and lots of oak as well. So historically, this area would burn over, whether it be from lightning strikes or native peoples, and then sometimes those fires would hold over, as we call them today, where they'd smolder in a log or a stump or something like that for many days on end. Then also another fire would start. So that progression throughout a growing season might actually have several fires going. So in this country, we look at fire return intervals, as we call them, historically, between 1 to 25 years where a place would burn. So it'd be really burned over a lot, enough to get those prairie species and keep it more open, about half open across the entire 1.2 million acre landscape. But then also not so much burned over that you couldn't have these trees at least existing and being there. And sometimes you would have forests, and it's just going to change, shift over time. But many of these openings, as you read historically, would be about a half a township in size, so pretty darn big. But that's why we had sharp-tailed grouse here in great numbers, due to that open type habitat, more like what you see out west currently was actually here in Wisconsin. And so the bird, went from really good numbers. We look at back in the 30s when we first started collecting harvest information, harvesting over 100,000 birds a year. Back then, they counted the sharptails and prairie chickens together. So you're looking at 100,000, that's a lot. And then you start looking, into the 50s, you're still looking at, 60 or 6,000, 6,600, something like that. And it just keeps dropping over time. And then you start looking into the 90s and you're talking like into the, 100 birds harvest or something like that. So as far as the birds harvested goes, that's been the historic change in habitat. What's happened is in the south and the west, we lost the habitat there, mainly due to agriculture and letting the trees grow up and the savannas becoming woods. And then in the northwest, it's the same thing. Where fire control right about in the 1930s, Hanson got better at fighting wildland fires. We started having more roads and other fire breaks in there as well, and the habitat started to change, going from more open to more wooded. And then it started preferring those species that would, had requires the wooded conditions, and then the species that need the more open conditions, like the sharptail, and they started losing out. And to the extent now, we have sharp-tailed grouse on many of our wildlife areas that are managed for more openness, Crex, Meadows, Namakagon, Barrett, Douglas County Wildlife Area, places like that. And then also where we're doing management for them in a more forested setting, where we're doing rolling barrens or big, larger block harvests to maintain the bird. And there's also, the German road fire from 2013 that burned about 7,500 acres, a big, terrible wildfire, but the habitat did react to that fire, and the bird moved in, and I think there's 4 leks currently within that. Leks are kind of the dancing grounds in the spring where the birds go to, display and try to attract a mate, do their courtship ritual. But in sharp-tail habitat, you see a lek or a dancing ground about every mile, and across that fire, it's roughly 5 or 6 miles long, and you see the 4 leks within there about every mile apart. It's really interesting to see the habitat react to that big fire, but also see the bird react and do exactly like we tell people it's going to do. But for some reason, when that happens, the biologist is always the most surprised because they're watching and waiting for it to happen. They need to see it. Um, so that's kind of where we have the bird in the state currently, is in this northwest part of the state, and kind of ranges from Burnett County, Washburn County, the corner of it there, across Douglas County and into Bayfield County, into the Bayfield County Peninsula. The northern tip of our sharp-tailed range is currently, it's called the Muckwa Barrens. It's part of the National Forest of Chequamegon up there. They have a big barren project there up North Highway too. So kind of the perspective there where things lay out.
It's kind of funny. Up until I kind of got connected with you guys, I had years ago helped a gentleman who was a bear guide up in the township of Muckwa. And nobody knew where Muckwa was until I started talking to you guys. And now it's like Muckwa this, Muckwa that, so I kind of find it a little bit funny that some of, these areas are not well known. And neither is the bird itself. I think in Wisconsin, it's not the synapses of Wisconsin. You think of Wisconsin, you think rough-tailed grouse or woodcock, at least from upland game species. And part of that has to do with the fact that we can recreate and still have recreating populations of rough grouse. When did the conservation efforts kind of start on the sharp-tailed grouse in Wisconsin, and what groups are involved, and when did that kind of start? I know the Wisconsin Sharptail Grouse Society has been very integral with some of your work. Were they part of the original kind of conservation effort that started with these birds?
I would say, yeah, to a certain degree. And really the effort started way back in the 50s, 1950s, where we started, creating these wildlife areas that were largely on lands that, were tax delinquent and stuff like that. And a lot of them were big wetlands, but yet with the Barrens community around it was mostly open. And they started, trying to maintain that openness for sharptails, but also, for nesting waterfowl and creating flowages, thinking of waterfowl production and stuff like that. But these big open wetlands are actually really good for the bird as well because they're already wide open. And that's what this bird needs, something really big and wide open, at least, 2 sections in size is what we're looking for in this environment. And that's kind of unique. And part of that too, to kind of paint the picture, like you go further west and it's already open. Even if it's egg country, it's already open. Then you just need enough habitat for the bird to make its life requirements. So you can have, a couple thousand acres of nice grass and brushland, but then like an 80 or 160 of CRP, that would actually be utilized for the bird because the system is already open. But here in Wisconsin, the northwest part of the state, where it's, primarily more of a wooded area now, due to, the fires being stopped and the trees growing up. But now we have to create the opening first to make it feel like open conditions. And then you have to have the habitat within that. So that, that started in the 50s, and a lot of people on the Sharptail Grouse Society were almost working back then. There's a lot of retirees in from wildlife management. But as that progressed along, and then certain things happened, like in the late 80s, early 90s, there was what's called a jack pine budworm outbreak. So up here in a lot of this private industrial forest land or on the county forest where just many sections also just die of pine forest. They came in and salvage cut that. And literally thinking about basically a clear cut over 10 years, but about the size of a township. So really big. And that was a big spike then in Sharptail Grouse. As that areas opened back up again, the Sharptail spiked back up again, and we got to see it just like what happened, at pre-settlement time or at settlement time. That period that happened then. So that helped the bird out, and really we're still seeing the effects of that in some of those lands. Some of those leks are still active. The birds are still there, but they just had to move around to the next cut as it is to kind of hang on to that. So the major effort started in the 50s, and then we started getting more recently within the last maybe 6-8 years, where we really started talking about pine barrens and how critical it is to many things, and not just sharptails, but sharptails included, and how unique of a system we have here. And we started calling it and realized what it was is we call it globally important, because if you want to see the Grand Canyon, well, you go there to see it. But somewhere in the world here, if you want to see the pine barrens, you come to Northwest Wisconsin, because that's where it is. So we have, like I said, 1.2 million acres of ground that potentially could be pine barrens. We're probably up around 60, 80,000 acres of pine barrens across the entire area now. And that's really a special place where you can see that, like I said, a mix of prairie and tree species that are fire adapted, and then really neat shrub species that like that acid type soil. So like lots of blueberries. It had that unique mix. That's really been the last maybe 6-8 years. We really started getting into that. Started some other projects, called Rolling Barrens project for the county forest, or with the private industrial forest, even state forest, where their mindset is forest production. So we're working within that to say, well, how can we do that harvesting and that regeneration of the forest, but do it in a way that would help sharptails out. We're looking at doing that, and we've had 5 or 6 projects going on now. Currently, we're they're harvesting, but doing it in a big block style management to kind of unfragment the forest and have it come back to the larger patch, and that's help the bird out as well. So that's happening, like I say, on different partnerships lands. Then Chippewa Grouse Society has been important with that, because we started doing that type of harvesting. You need your friends to go and tell people, why it's happening, why it's going on. So Sharptail Grouse Society partnered with the Friends of the Amaazen Barrens, Friends of Crex, Friends of the Douglas County Wildlife Area, or Bird Sanctuary as it's known, and the St. Clair River Association as well. Kind of came together and formed a working group. We called ourselves the Friends of the Northwest Sands, and put together some publications to help explain to the public, why this is happening and why this is a good thing. And this is done in a thoughtful, purposeful manner. And it also kind of lays into, the Northwest Sands have that corridor plan where we're doing these projects where it makes sense. There's a corridor plan out there that kind of says, how can we reconnect the pine barrens? And so we're laying out these projects to be kind of in between the bigger wildlife areas and other core populations where we have the bird, to hopefully link them up. So that plan runs all the way from Crex Meadows in the south to Muckwa Barrens in the north, and we're trying to get more projects within that area to help the bird and also help the pine barrens as well, and all the other species that kind of come with it, because we consider the sharptail grouse kind of an umbrella species, in that if you have the right habitat for the sharptail, you're going to capture a whole bunch of other species that also need a more open environment. But sharptail needs more of it. So if you get sharptails, you're going to get a whole host of other species. Upland sandpiper being an important one there. And then in the kind of the rolling barrens, we're regenerating jack pine for sharptails, but also just to grow the next forest. Well, as that pine gets a little older, then it gets into an age class where the Kirkland's warbler just came off the federal native list, would be important. So there's other species as well, and any pine barrens habitats up in this part of the state. You look at what turkeys need, and in the south they need oak, but in the north they need openings for brood rearing and nesting and feeding sites. And a lot of turkeys around these barrens, especially when you have mix pine and oak forest right on the edge. Kind of a great formula to have lots of turkeys as well. So there's other species of game birds also help barren site projects.
So with that, kind of is a good segue to kind of talk about the sand barrens specifically. So maybe we can back up just a little bit and talk about the habitat. I don't know that all the listeners, we got people all over the country, and, let's just take Nebraska for an example. I don't know that people from Nebraska are going to know specifically what makes up the sand barrens in Wisconsin. And we kind of touched a little bit on, the different species within that sand barren. But geology-wise, what is the sand barren? How did this kind of get created? I'm assuming it came through some of the glacial era of North America here, and kind of pushed up some of these sand barrens per se. Can you give us a little bit of that kind of biology and habitat makeup, and kind of how it became the sand barrens, and why is it so special in comparison to the rest of the state?
Yeah, definitely. And like I say, this is from glaciation. A couple different things going on there. In the south part, it's actually from there's a huge glacial lake Brandsburg, actually, that was backed up and covered into the hundreds of thousands of acres, and that produces really flat sand plain, where underneath it then is kind of the leftover clays that settled out from the lake. And then when the lake went away from the glacial times on melting, that led to this really firm clay bed. But then as things blew around after the lake went dry, that was all the sand, and the sand actually got laid out in what's dunes essentially. And so now if you go out to Crex Meadows, you see this flat area with these little hills and ridges that are it's hard to think of them as sand dunes, but that's what they are. And that's where that sand came from as well. So you have that going on. Then you also have the wetlands at Crex that are there because it doesn't drain through. They're kind of called perched wetlands, so they're up on top of the clay that's up from the glacier. And as you go further north, kind of upstream, then up into the watersheds there, then it becomes more glacial outwash. Some of those sand deposits there, 1 to 600 feet deep, so really deep sand. And then within that, there's pitted areas where there's ice mixed in the sand as the outwash went through. And as that ice melted, mixed in with the sand, it made all these pitted areas, which are now some of the nicest lakes you're going to see. These lakes are mostly all just groundwater seepage fed, so they're crystal clear. A bit on the cool side, but crystal clear water, great for bluegills and stuff like that, bass. And then further up, you start getting into more some river country with like St. Croix and Nankagan, kind of National Scenic Rivers, and also the Brule River as well, where they're getting most of their water seeped out of the sand, so it's crystal clear and cool. The Brule River is one of the best fisheries around as far as trout. And
I'd have to argue that the St. Croix, one of the best fisheries around too, Bob. But
oh yeah,
trout wise, the Brule is king in the Northwoods, and I'm a little bit I love the St. Croix. I spend a lot of time on the St. Croix in the summertime. So again, I'm a little bit biased, I guess you could say. But sorry, I had to interject there when you made that statement about the Brule. I had to stick up for the St. Croix a little.
Oh yeah, well it's what you're into, because the St. Croix, smallmouth bass, a lot of people fish for there, and the Brule is trout and salmon coming up from the big lake. So yeah, but they both have this benefit of getting their water out of the sand countries. Super high permeability rates, little to no runoff. So yeah, they're really crystal clear water coming into those systems. So yeah, you have this really deep droughty sand that when it dries out and then it burns. We do a lot of our work to maintain the system to prescribe burning, and some days we're pulling our hair out because it takes a couple hours of drying and you can literally burn. And then the next day, that's when you get your burning in, but the day after that, also boom, you're in high fire danger. So you can go from snow or rain and then 2 days later, you can be in high fire danger. It dries that fast. So from a prescribed burner standpoint, it's kind of tough. You really got to play the weather and get it right because you get these really narrow windows, especially in 20 years like this year.
Yeah, I know you've been on and off for a couple times here over the last week when we've been chatting about turning the fire on, or getting the green light to go. And then I think last week we you were going to burn, and then we got rain.
Right. Right. So you got to watch the radar and see if it hits your burn or not. You can go the next day. So it's tricky up here. And some of the bigger wildfires, a lot of us that are we're also wildland firefighters. But some of the bigger fires we've had in recent history, we're driving to work with the windshield wipers on, and also that afternoon you're on wildland fire. So it's pretty crazy.
That definitely, I've driven up there. I spent a lot of time recreating up there, and you can see it. I know when I go up there grouse hunting, especially in the northwest part of the state, I'm very conscious as to how much rain we've gotten. And because it can go from quiet in the woods to walking on eggshells and, dry leaves in a matter of a couple hours. And it's really amazing to see that. We hunted up there in Douglas County, I think. I didn't hunt up there this past season, but 2 seasons ago, and it was raining, and then the sun came out in the afternoon, and we had some great grouse hunting in the morning, and then we couldn't get on the birds at all in the afternoon because it was just too damn noisy. And a bunch of wild flushes and stuff that you unfortunately you get with the seasons and the fall with all the dry leaves on the ground, but it was like exacerbated.
Yeah, and that's important tying into the rest of the ecology of the habitat too, like the jack pine. That's the fire tree, and actually, about half of our cones are said to be serotinous cones where they need fire to open actually to drop their seed out. So within our area here, the further north you actually go, it becomes more of that fire type cone that needs fire to open because those jack pine cones just sit on the tree. They don't drop like other pine species. They just sit there until a fire comes through and they don't get a chance to open up. So that's part of the, as we're doing these type of harvests and trying to get natural jack pine regeneration with our forestry partners, what we'll do is go out and scarify after a harvest where we kind of drag anchor chains or what's called a roller chopper. And something just kind of beats up the ground. So we're trying to get to happen is have exposed, black mineral soil, and then those pine cones sitting right on top of that black. So in the hot, July, August sun will get those pine cones hot enough so they open, so seed comes out. So that's kind of unique to the strategy of regenerating jack pine. It also kind of tells the story of why it's kind of hard to do on private lands, because to take your woods, cut it all down, and essentially run something like a disc through it or something like that, like a heavy disc to get some soil exposed, hoping to get jack pine to come back. That's not something every private landowner wants to do. So it's kind of a challenge that way too, as far as the ecology of that tree and having to mimic an epic wildland fire to get it to regenerate. So it's one of the challenges we have.
Yeah, that's something unique to the jack pine that honestly, I didn't realize until you just mentioned it. And it's kind of interesting that, fire plays a huge role in that reproductive success of, they don't drop their pine cones unless there's a fire. And I find that really fascinating because I don't think there's places in the country where this fire landscape is very important. I know the southwest portion of the United States, or southeast, I'm sorry, is kind of very similar to that, but it's very unique to our corner of Wisconsin. So
there's a lot of unique things that happen with that too. Like I talked about that German Road fire, where a lot of that was actually in red pine plantations, but the old habit would be for a red pine plantation, as it grows and gets a little bit older, you can go in and do thinnings in it to get some economic return from it. It also opened up the area for trees to grow and get bigger. But the old habit would be to go in that first thinning round and take out all the jack pine that was naturally coming within it. But lesson learned from that German Road fire from 2013 is the plantations that hadn't happened yet or hadn't happened for some reason had jack pine in them yet. And when that fire went through, all those jack pine released their seeds, and they had a really nice flush of jack pine seedlings coming back, where the landowner then didn't have to pay to get the trees, site prepped and then planted. They had it coming back for free versus spending a lot of money to get it to come back per acre. So that was kind of a lesson learned there. And I think more people are going to leave those jack pine out there in those forests now, but just because of that, because it is costly to regenerate, forests. But if you get it for free, that's better. the other side of that coin too, you might be wondering, why is this biologist, the sharptail guy that likes open habitats, why is he so worried about growing trees? And that's because a lot of these are partner forests where their objective is to grow trees for profit, and that's what they're supposed to be doing. So if they're going to do habitat work, partnering with us, it's still going to involve growing trees, but in a way that is good for the bird as well. And the neat thing about the pine barrens is it's disturbance dependent habitat. So all that disturbance we're doing to get the trees to come back actually helps the barrens. It likes to take a beating and come back. It's kind of the champion of the comeback. So as you do that, we're finding we're going out doing some vegetation spot plots and some botany monitoring. We actually have a retired botanist that's coming out and helping us survey some of these areas. And some of these areas where literally the logs just left not all that long ago, they're coming back to really nice pine barrens that we're able to compare them to historic like studies done like the 1940s, where we're almost at the same level of native species versus non-native. So we're getting really high quality habitat to come back without picking up all the invasive species that maybe you would other places that have more of those invasive species around.
Sure, it makes sense.
And that's the good news.
Yeah. So just real quickly, a question about jack pine. Is jack pine a highly marketable timber?
It depends on the market. It's primarily used for pulp. And pulp markets seem to be kind of coming and going. But in general, they have a market. They can also be used for biofuels. So there's, second place you can go with them as well. But that's primarily the use. And what I'm seeing as I work more and more with foresters, that these markets I'm surprised how much they go up and down, even for other species, as well. And, that's constantly part of what we do. And as we do these type of partner projects, as the prices are good, well, we might get more work done that year, and as the prices kind of trail off, then you're going to slow down on all that work. Because it's kind of the working forest out there. It's the loggers doing a lot of this work, taking that product off the landscape and taking it to market. So a strong market is really critical to what we do.
Makes sense. And how did some of the recent COVID, I guess, shutdowns and shakeup in the logging industry and specifically the mills, how did that affect some of these timber harvest projects that you guys had going?
It didn't initially slow them down, but then eventually it did. As the mills slow down or shut down for a while and come back on, that shrinks the demand for a little while. As far as working individually with foresters, they were just not going into the office. They'd wake up in the morning and do whatever they want to do, then go out in the woods and just kept right on working. But they're working by themselves, and we were able to work together and get some good work done. But eventually, it just came to slow down the markets to a certain degree. And then, like I say, there's been some mill closures too, which have hurt us here in the state, where we'd love to see more market for our timber up here. I think currently we probably have more timber than we have a market for it. So it's something we would like to somehow encourage.
Yeah, I leased some land in I would call it, I guess, western or eastern Polk County, and primarily all white and red oak, I think. And we had a tornado come through the area not too terribly long ago. I think we're pushing 2 years now in July. And the landowner has had the damnedest time trying to get logging companies in to clear out this down oak, because I guess some of the hardwoods, at least last year, were not being taken by the mill. And a lot of like the pulpwood and aspen kind of timber was being taken in high numbers. I kind of look at it as, well, all those people that rushed out to buy toilet paper for the pandemic, kind of helped some of that industry a little bit. But, it's a difficult dynamic with forestry management and habitat management, because there's so many different players. So, for example, you've got a couple industrial forest operations up in the northwest Wisconsin area. One in particular that we had discussed the other day at the Wisconsin Sharptail Grouse Society board meeting was kind of interesting, because they had and I can't remember the name, you'll have to tell the listeners, but Hancock, yes, that's correct. And they had kind of a mission that was at least a little bit different than most, I guess, bottom line kind of industrial forest operations. They kind of center around making sure that the habitat is there for wildlife as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. Part of the Hancock's mission is, they're growing trees, but they're also doing it in a way that does really unique things for landscape, and they're really big in what they call stewardship. Where anytime they can do a project with us that fits within what they're doing, um, and still produces some trees. Sometimes they're even willing to not worry about the profit quite as much, and then just do these projects just because they're the right thing to do. And we see that working with them has been a great thing, and to see that that's part of their business model. And even some of the county forests we're working on, the county forests up this part of the state are absolutely huge. Pushing 200,000 acres, and so when you have that much land, you have a little more flexibility to have a couple thousand acres here and there where you just got kind of some dangerous things on too. Um, so that's kind of the neat thing about having that land base here. And like I say, most of this land up here is still in a native type. They said it's growing up a little bit taller than we want right now. So as we do these projects, we can get it back to it might be a rolling barrens project where we grow trees. There's going to be really good sharptail habitat for a while. But also we want to turn it back into a wildlife area and start burning it again with prescribed fire. We know that's going to come back really well as well because all these native species are still there. They're just kind of in the shade of the taller trees currently. And once we open up the sunlight and disturb the soil or putting fire onto it, the species react and come back. Long ago, as they started doing that Crex Meadows wildlife area, that kind of got the nickname of the Crex effect, where you're getting actually really great prairies there without planting anything because the seed and the plants are already there.
It's just a matter of kind of burning off the current vegetation that's there. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah. And some of those, even within some of those woodlots here, you can still find big blue stem down in there, but it looks really puny and it's just kind of barely hanging on. And the big blue stem's kind of the one of the bigger prairie grasses as far as what we think of across the prairie. But you start burning then once the canopy's removed, and it comes back. And in the sand country, it never gets to be the height of the saddle horn or anything like that, but it'd be 4 or 5 feet tall, something like that. Especially after fire, maybe pushing 6 feet. But under the canopy, it might be a foot or two, just kind of hanging on.
Sure. And how, is big blue stem a big part of the regeneration that helps sharptail grouse? Or is it just a combination of those native grasses?
I think it's a combination, really. Big blue stem is kind of our most, I guess, numerous prairie species type bunch grass we have here. But there's all the other forbs as well. Probably the forbs might play into a little bit more as far as producing, seeds and attracting insects for the young birds to eat.
I've noticed with some conversations I've had with people who manage habitat for quail, that forbs is a key element in a lot of this in insects. And I don't know that people, they look at pheasant cover and maybe even grouse cover for that matter, and you see grasslands or you see aspen, but that barrens area doesn't have a lot of grasslands. It doesn't have a lot of aspen. It's got a mixture of both mixed in with pines. So it's kind of a unique area that unfortunately today is not producing the number of birds that we'd like to see. And it's through the DNR and through some of these partnerships with like a Hancock and landowners that are making this all happen. To kind of segue into where things are at today and where you guys are going with some of these partnerships and what, let's just, for instance, there's a number of different wildlife management areas from Bayfield County down to Brunette County. And I know you guys are trying to link these properties up together so there's more of a cohesive travel corridor for these birds. What can an average listener that might have some land up in Northwest Wisconsin and say this podcast inspires them to get involved, who would be a good resource for them to reach out to?
So the one of the tricky things about getting these properties linked up again is you have something like Crex Meadows or Namakagon Barrens. Crex is like 28,000 acres. Namakagon Barrens like 6,000 acres. You're talking about big properties with core populations of birds on them. And then the other areas where they might, consider using as a stepping stone as part of the corridor. So stepping stone is how we're kind of considering this corridor where the birds will kind of hop or fly from one project area to the next in order to get connected to the other populations. But those are looking like two sections in size. You're literally 1,280 acres to be a minimum size for this bird. So to get that much land base open, that's the tricky part.
Yeah, and I would say the average landowner in that area maybe owns at best probably a fifth of that.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and that's a big tract of land for. These are I don't know. You know better than I do, but I've been up even in just the lake region where there's a lot of vacation homes and stuff in like the Webster Siren area.
Yeah.
Those are all quarter acre lots and stuff like that. So there's quite a diversity of different land sizes over there. So 1,280 acres is a lot that you guys want to manage, but do you work with smaller landowners that kind of are in that cohesive strategic area that maybe only have a 40-acre parcel?
Largely what we're seeing with that is, we're working with the bigger county forests and the private industrial forests and then state forests, sort of these bigger land bases, I guess, where it comes to play. And then, because this is a stepping stone style corridor, not necessarily, a straight linear thing that has to be all the way open. Working with those other private landowners is kind of a sense of the public and knowing what's going on over here and just having support for doing these bigger projects on the public lands. And the private industrial lands, as far as knowing why it's going on and knowing it's a good thing and knowing we have something unique here in this part of the state and seeing that local support for doing these projects. A lot of our friends groups that really like the place, say like Namakagon Barrens, a lot of those people actually live really close by. And they love it that they're burning and doing this, creating this wide open landscape they can go and visit and play and recreate and hunt on. But then they go home, they want to have a few trees around for some shade. So having that understanding that we have something unique going on through this corridor, and then supporting it and reaching out to us, whether it be one of the friends groups or the Sharptail Grouse Society, something like that, as far as garnering that support. Because there's when people first see the Pine Barrens, they're like, "Wow, what happened here?" It's this big opening all of a sudden, and where'd the trees go? And you see them coming back, but they're all young and stuff like that. But then they try to keep them that way. So it's a big part of the education because the Pine Barrens, when we're actively managing it, looks much different than the rest of the state. And I really appreciate the podcast here today that you're doing, because a lot of folks don't really realize that we have Sharptail type style habitat here in Wisconsin, and so it takes some education to let people know, like, this is why we're doing it, this is what we have, this is how unique it is as well.
Well, and yeah, you're very welcome. I'm super glad that you could come on the podcast and share some of this stuff, because it is unique and it's in dire straits really at this point. And it's really comes down to pretty much what everything does when you're talking about wildlife management, and especially these species of concern, and it's habitat. And when you're talking about 1,200 acres in an area where, you're not going to get 1,200 acres all in one piece of connecting properties, unless it's really a wildlife management area or state-owned or county-owned land, or federal land for that matter. So it is really an education piece, and it's really kind of the goal of this particular podcast is to let people know about the Wisconsin Sharptail grouse, what makes it unique, why do we still have these birds after a number of years, and obviously where we're going to kind of be going here a little bit as to what you guys are doing today. We've covered quite a bit of it, but I think you guys are doing some really unique stuff, especially with Bayfield County when it comes to like GPS collaring and tracking these birds, which is kind of new to the Sharptail grouse, at least in Wisconsin, right?
Oh yeah, and the technology that's coming into play in the last couple of years, and literally every month it just keeps getting better. It's just rapidly changing. To where now you can get a GPS tag and put it on a sharp-tailed grouse, have it light enough, less than 3% of their body weight, so they really don't hardly notice it. They can still avoid predators. They can act like a sharp-tailed grouse is supposed to act, but then they can report back, every couple hours, however you want to set it, actually. And that can change over time. You can actually talk to this crazy thing, and then change how often you get readings on it. And these are GPS, so the bird is reporting back to us what it's doing, and we're just now starting to get a few on the air, trapping and collaring of these birds is going on, currently. What we hope to do is, a lot of these projects that we're working on are right at that minimum size. So we want to make sure we're getting the habitat right. So if it can kind of produce like a kind of a thunderstorm map and show us, what the birds are really using and what the birds are maybe cold to, then we'll know, better what to do. And then to analyze that, and then also look at how these birds move between properties. If we can do something to help that out as well, if they're following, a certain corridor or avoiding certain things, we can learn from that. And the Natural Resource Research Institute up in Duluth is helping us out with this, doing the research. And like we told them as managers, if you could tell us something that makes our management style 2% better, I mean, we'll jump on it. we'll say thank you and go with it. So yeah, population is in dire straits, and we are trying to help out. And this research, we really hope finds that stone we didn't turn over yet. We've got tons of experience managing the barons and managing sharptails, but we have no pride when it comes down to stuff like this. We're definitely open to any suggestion that they might have, and we're trying to do good by the bird. We just need to know what to do at this point.
No, and you shared a map prior to last week's board meeting, and I found it really unique and awesome to see that data, because I come out of the electronics manufacturing space. That's where I spent most of my career, and worked on a number of different asset tracking applications and other things where basically the same parameters exist for just a different monitoring. You're monitoring maybe a truck instead of a bird. And the efficiencies that have been driven through those types of data-driven decisions in the corporate world and the industrial world really helped those companies improve their overall services or product or customer experience. And it's really exciting to see that data start trickling into what you're doing, because I think that the long term, there'll be a huge return, because you can really finite or really pinpoint what exactly is working and maybe what's not working from a habitat standpoint. What are they utilizing on a regular basis? And like you said, what are they not really interested in? I think compilation of data over the next few years would be really exciting to see what comes out of it and what exactly you guys can change maybe your management plan slightly to accommodate what the data is reporting to you. It's really neat to see.
Oh yeah, and that's kind of the exciting part about it too, is we have the land management capability to make those changes. So we just, as soon as we find out what they are, we can go for it. I feel, unless it's something too crazy, but I think we can probably get there. And one of the, you talked about, kind of longevity of the project too, is part of the new technology is you used to have a battery and the kind of the radio collars that would last for, 3 months or 4 months, some number like that. But now these new tags that are GPS, they also have a solar panel on them that keeps that battery charged for you, so it can last you 2-3 years. So really a huge change in how long that product can run and how long you pick up that data. So yeah, great to see this technology coming on board, and I think it can possibly help us a great deal.
Well, and it should drive some efficiencies too. I mean, you think of the yesteryears of kind of tracking animals and from a wildlife management standpoint, and you're putting radio collars on them and running out with a radio receiver and trying to, literally on foot, trying to track these birds down and gather that information. I mean, it just takes time. It takes people. It takes manpower. And now you go through the effort of trapping a bird and collar it up. And now the system, satellite and data collection software collects that data for you, and you run a report and you get instant data that you can analyze versus compiling that data over time with, traditional telemetry type tracking systems. So it's really, really neat. I think, at least from what I've been able to see so far, I think it's going to really drive a lot of smart decisions about habitat management for you guys in the future.
Yeah, and we're excited to see the first couple of birds we collared, we tagged were males, and they come back to the same dancing spot every day. And literally, the ones we put the new GPS tags on, they came back the next day and were dancing and fighting with other males and doing just what they're supposed to do. So we're excited to see that they're acting the way they're supposed to act, even though they have these tags on them. And now, yeah, like you say, they're sending us the information. We just have to sit there and receive it. So. Yeah, the main work is getting the birds caught and the tags put on, and then the next day they report to us. So, pretty excited about that. We think this project's going to run a couple years. We are also going to try to get some juvenile birds in the fall that are near adult but yet still together. So we're hoping to get some of that because those are the birds that might disperse more. So we want to try to get that as well to kind of show how that dispersal could happen to new habitats. So we're hoping for that, but we're going to keep going. Get some in the spring, some in the fall, and do that for a couple of years to help build our sample size. Right now, we're looking at only taking a couple birds and putting these tags on per lek, a couple males, a couple females. So it's a small sample size that we're going to build over time, and then through these GPS trackers, actually just have way better data that instead of a bird just taking off, you can't find it because you got a radio transmitter on it. The thing went 20 miles in the direction you guess it go. Now they can't do that to us because it's a global positioning system. So we'll find them. Actually, they'll find us. So report back to us where they go.
No, it's really neat. So real quickly, can you explain to the listeners how you guys go about trapping these birds in order to tag them, collar them?
Yeah, so we have these lek sites that are traditional the dancing grounds that return to this time of year. The 20s of April are kind of prime time. But before this as well, the whole month of April really. But they go there and they'll display and dance, and they'll be the dominant males will be kind of in the center of the lek, and the dominant in the middle, and then the subordinates kind of around the edges. But they'll dance and display for the females. Then when a female comes in and gets close to the lek, all the males will just go crazy and just be dancing like crazy, stomping their feet, their tails up in the air. They make sounds that kind of sound like Martians. That's what I tell people, and they'll fight and carry on to get the hen to come look at them. But we do is we set our traps up within that lek site, and they have kind of walk-in traps, as they're called, where the bird will walk in and either can't get out because we have a kind of like a metal trap style door, or it'll be the door we actually created now that are we can trigger electronically and shut it. That way, sometimes if we don't want to catch males, we can leave it open. They'll walk back out trying to get a hen and trap instead. So. It's pretty crazy to see it work. It seems rather simple, but these birds are so tied to the lek and so tied to where their spot is that they've been defending for how long that they really want to be there. They have a lot of energy invested in it, so they're able to trap them that way.
That's really neat. Now, are you going to, when you try to collar young birds, are you taking the same approach, or are you looking at doing things a little bit differently? Late summer,
yeah, that'll
early
be
fall.
a little bit differently. Usually then in the fall, they're still probably fairly close to the lek, but there's grouped up. We have these hens on the air, as we call it, but collared. So you can find them. We'll be able to find the hen, which should have the broods with it. And what we're hoping to do is, called jacklighting or spotlighting, where you go through at night and you kind of, if you know where to look about, you can find the brood, hit them with a spotlight, and they'll kind of freeze for momentarily and get something kind of like a landing net, but different on them, smaller mesh size, but we can catch them that way through that at night when the birds are roosted in kind of grassy cover.
Okay, so it is like nothing similar to how they band woodcock. I mean, you are out there with nets and trying to find these birds at night, and it sounds very challenging.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But at least this way, we'll have a starting point with having the hen location. So
yeah, it's a little easier than like riding around in the truck with a telemetry radio transmitter or receiver.
Right.
So with all that you guys have going on, just a specific question. I didn't really give you any inclination I was going to ask you this. So if you don't have an answer, no problem. But, those GPS tracking systems are extremely expensive. Is there any like nonprofit groups or like is Wisconsin Sharptail Grouse Society accepting any donations, or are there any groups that are accepting donations to help fund some of these collars?
Yeah, the Sharptail Grouse Society of Wisconsin. When they heard that this research project is going on, they were just happy as you can imagine about it. And they actually bought their very first collar, so they wanted to for sure be in on the ground floor. And if people are interested in helping out, I think a donation to the Sharptail Grouse Society, mentioning that project, I think they'd love to be able to throw another collar or two at it. That'd be even more data we can get on this bird and help figure out how we can help the bird. Like that'd be the best source to go with, right to the Wisconsin Sharptail Grouse Society.
Awesome. And I'll include their contact information in the show notes so that any of the listeners can potentially reach out and get involved. There hasn't been a recreating population on these birds for, I think since the 90s. Is that correct?
No, we had a season a couple years ago here. I got it in front of me. We issued 25 permits in 2018. I think 11 birds were shot. And there was a season in 2016, 2015, then off again. The last one before that was 2012. So it's been kind of blinking on and off, and it's been slowly getting less.
and so back in 2018, 11 birds were shot, 25 permits. I'm assuming that was done through some kind of draw program or with the DNR.
Yeah. Yep. We do our Lex surveys every year to get our information on the population. Then we get our Sharptail Grouse Society, Sharptail Grouse committee together, talk about where the population is at, and look at the viability of a hunting season, and then try to figure out what we should do. Some recent information came in. A study was done called the Population Viability Assessment that basically said at our current level, population, if we continued harvest, that we would be risking, the bird to a certain extent. So I guess now our task is to go back in and get our last system, to determine when we're going to have a harvest. It wasn't working the way we want it to work, and we need to come up with some other idea so we're not risking the population, to a great extent by harvest. And really, my hope is someday to get this population up high enough where you don't have to worry about it. You can hunt them without worry. It'd be a great thing. And that's what we're hoping for down the road. If we continue on with these partnerships, creating more habitat, we feel we can do that if we get to a good response. But it's all about the partnerships, working out on the landscape, doing the good things to create the habitat for the bird.
Habitat. Every time.
That's what it's all about. Yep.
No, and I was thoroughly impressed. For the listeners, I attended the Wisconsin Sharptail Grouse Society last week, and it's amazing to see a group of guys that care so much about this particular bird, and enough that they worked in the DNR for 30, 40 years, and now they've in retirement have dedicated a lot of their time to helping you and some of these other partnerships out with creating the best habitat going forward. So obviously we touch base on the Wisconsin Sharptail Grouse Society. Is there any other organizations that, the Friends of Crex or are these groups all kind of involved in Sharptail Grouse Society habitat? Is there anybody specifically that maybe landowner or somebody could reach out to or get involved other than the Wisconsin Sharptail Grouse Society for these birds?
Oh yeah, definitely. The Friends of Crex, is the wildlife area there. Friends of Amaazen Barrens, for that property. Then the Douglas County Wildlife Area is also known as the Bird Sanctuary. So the Friends of the Bird Sanctuary is also a great organization that's up in that Douglas County area. That would be really good to partner up with or join and help out. And these groups, like you say, there was a lot of retired DNR guys at Sharptail Grouse Society meeting. But there's also the people that work in the private sector as well. It takes all types, and they're really welcoming to get more help from anybody.
Yeah, and for the listeners, I attended as a guest, and I was able to pull up a chair and participate. It was a very welcoming group of guys. Probably use a female or two on the in the group, but just to create a little more diversity. But at the end of the day, these guys are really in tune with the sharptail grouse. They care a lot about the bird, and I think all of us would love to see some type of population restored so that we can hunt the birds without detriment long term. And it was one of the reasons why I reached out. I've got a couple dogs, and the thought of never really being able to run those dogs on sharptail grouse in Wisconsin was kind of overwhelming to me. And so that's kind of what led me down this path to kind of create this podcast related to the sharptail grouse, and then specifically kind of some of the native species here in Wisconsin. So I really appreciate you kind of shedding a light and coming on the podcast and sharing your information, and hopefully we can get a few listeners to get involved and really help this whole effort out, because timing is kind of good at this particular moment. I think, if I recall, you're in or going to be doing a new 10-year plan for these birds.
Yeah, the sharptail grouse plan is up for us to renew it or update it. I think we're supposed to do those every 15 years or so, but it's not a hard cut in stone thing. Currently, we're trying to get some more people hired to kind of even out the workload, then get into the plan. But anyways, yeah, that's something we're looking at here shortly. We're forming a committee together to help out with that, and to put it out for public review as well, so the public can chime in on what they think and come up with some options as far as what we could possibly do to help manage this bird the right way.
So, Bob, when do you think that plan will be worked on and / shared with the public? Is it something that is possibly 6 months out, a year out, a couple of years out?
Well, as the guy that's going to be in charge of getting it done, I wish I knew for sure so I could plan. But it's probably going to be within 6 months to a year, I would think.
Okay, good. So timing's good. Start creating awareness about this, and then there could be engagement from the public within a year or so.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, in closing here, I guess I'd give you the microphone to say anything that you feel we missed or didn't cover today that's important to the habitat, the birds, and kind of the story here of the Wisconsin sharptail grouse. Is there anything we missed?
No, I just encourage people to kind of Google up or get some information on our pine barrens and come up and check them out and kind of go exploring and kind of get lost for a few hours out in the pine barrens. That's the best thing to do.
And donate a little money.
What's that?
And donate a little money.
Well, yeah, that'd be great too. The barrens is something that kind of gets into your blood, and people that come up and discover it kind of gets in their blood, become passionate about it, and it's kind of a neat place. And come up, check it out. And if you're a birder, there's tons of birds out there that you go check out. The wildebeest are going to be coming here shortly, and the sharptail are still dancing, so it's a good time of year to go out and really explore the barrens. And like I say, once you got it in your blood, and join up with one of these organizations to help out.
Awesome. Bob, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast and, again, shedding some light on these birds. It's like I said earlier, they're in dire straits. They need some attention. And, Bob, you're kind of at the forefront of all this, kind of coordinating the efforts with private and public partnerships on this. So thank you so much for what you're doing. And, I've definitely, we'll be talking more. You'll be seeing more of me.
That sounds so great. Thank you for what you do.
Awesome, Bob. Well, thanks again. And if you don't mind hanging on here for a minute, I'm going to stop the recording for today.
Okay. Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Amaazen Outdoors podcast. We just want to remind you to get involved. Take on some conservation efforts of your own. Get some kids outside. Support the conservation organizations that support building the habitat that you go and hunt birds, deer, all the wildlife. If you just like to go watch these things, get involved, make sure you're supporting those groups that are supporting the places you love. God bless America.